Yeah, as the academic on the committee, I wanted to just follow up some more academic-y type questions. Is this the kind of thing the ESRC would fork out for?
In the past, it's been quite difficult to get money out of the ESRC. They have changed, and this is part of an ongoing cycle, to be honest, because when I first started working in this field back in 2006, nobody was interested in gambling. And in fact, I had conversations with leading officials at the Department of Health at the time who said, you know, we would slightly have laughed you out of the building if you tried to describe gambling as a health issue.
After Mickey Mouse degrees and low value universities have just been decried.
Absolutely.
So that's my feeling.
And when you don't have central government saying this is a priority and look at how much we value this work and how much we need it and how much it's going to actually go into our policy, it makes it really difficult then for things like the SRC to be able to say, well, look, there's a really clear pathway to impact here. And actually the SRC are looking for value for money. They're looking for things that are going to make a difference. And that's why I said leadership. You know, if you don't have that top level leadership and strategy to be able to demonstrate how you're going to affect that change, that when you're then competing against every other social and economic issue, it puts you at a disadvantage. Now, it is starting to change. The ESRC is starting to fund, NIHR is starting to fund, but it takes a really long time to develop that kind of quality and capacity and for that infrastructure to flow through. And therefore, that leads us in a situation where we don't have the quality of evidence base or the capacity or the early career researchers coming through as we would like.
And you're a sociologist, you're a psychologist. What's your PhD in?
My previous life as an academic, I worked in political history and political theory.
Never mind,
Could I just add, there's one thing that bothers me about the conversation about research. Clearly there are things that we don't know. Clearly the proposals in the white paper look like a significant advance on what we've had, and that's really important for future policy making. But we have enough evidence to act now. One of the tactics of these global industries is to delay. And so we don't want to get to a position where we need several more years of research before we act. We know enough about advertising. We've just had a good conversation about that. We know about marketing and what this aggressive marketing is doing, that they're targeting the most vulnerable people. Those people who have the most problems are by far getting the most marketing. We know where the risk areas are online. We know the types of products that are more higher risk. So I mean, it's great to see all of these proposals, and I warmly welcome them, but we have enough to act, and we should be doing more with what we already have.
So my previous office mate, Emma Casey, who says hi,
hi.
At your university, she stopped doing gambling research because there was no money in it. And she said the problem is it's funded by GambleAware, who take voluntary donations from the industry. She argues there should be compulsory levies. Would you agree that the industry should have to fork out and then it would get done properly?
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely need independent funding free from that voluntary system. It's one of the critical things that actually stymies the development of researchers and research careers. So in the past, for full disclosure, I have taken money from GambleAware. I haven't done so since 2018, 2019, and I'm not going to do so going forward. And it creates a massive barrier because there are then other researchers who won't then work with you, for example. People don't trust the results that you then produce. There is a perception that the industry can influence the results. And actually, during that experience, I did have a couple of instances where there was an overstepping of the mark and it wasn't comfortable, and I don't want to be in that situation going forward.
And is it like tobacco research in the 60s, like you see on Mad Men? Is it like that at the moment with this voluntary system?
I think we talked before about the nature of the relationship between the industry and GambleAware, by way of example being one of a dependent relationship rather than an independent relationship, because the very existence is dependent on that industry funding. Industry having the ability to withdraw that funding clearly could influence behaviour. And when you look at the outputs from GambleAware, public health specialists and that field, for example, raise serious concerns about the framing of the school's education, for example, about the narrow repertoire of research that's commissioned. The messaging and the campaigns usually are framed at the individual level rather than at the population level, at the public health level. So there have been serious concerns, and that's why we you know, we welcome this significant step forward away from the voluntary arrangements.
Can I just add really quickly, with the Gamble Aware situation, it's not just about the source of funding, it's also about the quantum of funding. So at the time when I was working with Gamble Aware, they got about 10 million a year. Most of that went to treatment, about 1 million went to research. So there just wasn't that throughput. Even if you were going to accept money from Gamble Aware, there wasn't that throughput of funding to actually do very much research at all. So we just heard that on average there's about 38 alcohol studies funded via UKRI. Now, if you say that they're about 500,000 each, which is probably an underestimate, you're talking about 20 million a year on alcohol compared to less than 1 million that was coming through up until a few years ago for Gamble Aware. It made it really hard to sustain a career in gambling research.
And presumably, as a sociologist, no one's doing stuff on intersectionality, feminist gambling, all that stuff has
Absolutely.
gone out
I mean,
the window.
there are huge gaps, and there are huge areas where there's no kind of critical questioning of gambling research. There are particular areas where it's directed towards, but actually having that freedom to have that really critical, really important thought and academic inquiry is missing.
Would you agree with the conclusions of the Goldsmiths Fair Game report, which is now getting quite old, 2014, but Emma referred me to it, that the industry's actually got the most accurate figures, but they just won't share it?
It depends, accurate figures on what. Obviously, they have the best data online.
Qualitative as well, we need to interview actual gamblers.
Yeah.
People have said on social media this is a very moralistic inquiry with people who are condemning, but it'd be good to hear the voice of the gambler.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so the online industry have the best data in terms of what their consumers are actually doing. But it's quite narrow because what you see is essentially all of their patterns of engagement with the products. What you don't see is any of that contextualization of who these people are, what are their circumstances, what else is driving them, what are their influences, what are the actual outcomes of the things that they're experiencing. So you need a mixed economy of research methods and data to actually get the best insight and information.
Think Tank World, do they cover this, or are you unusual?
I mean, I don't want to blow the trumpet of the Social Market Foundation, but we have established, I guess, the strongest track record in the world of think tanks when it comes to the question of gambling. From the other side, the more libertarian perspective, the Institute of Economic Affairs have worked on gambling with Chris Snowden. Ian Duncan Smith's think tank, Centre for Social Justice, did something on affordability checks a couple of years ago.
Externally funded, quite often think tanks have to sing for their supper.
Oh yeah,
So
they'll all be funded. They'll all be funded by someone or something.
The gambling industry, or?
Well, I wouldn't want to speculate on other think tanks. I mean, the Institute of Economic Affairs are not transparent about their funding, so I don't know who funds their pro-industry work, but one could potentially draw the dots.
So should this thing, when it's not a white paper, should there be a concrete code of conduct for how research is conducted with agreed rules of who it is and government funding as well, ESRC, whoever?
Yeah, that would be a huge step forward. And in fact, that's the sort of thing that the WHO have developed for alcohol and for tobacco, and taking those principles and applying them to gambling would be a great step forward. But again, we need that infrastructure to support the researchers. So I don't judge any researcher, myself included, from having gone down the Gamble Aware route, because that's what I needed to do at the time to sustain my career, to be honest. I wouldn't be sat here had I not taken that funding 7, 8 years ago. There are early career researchers who are facing that same dilemma now, and it does have an impact on where your career goes next, on who will work with you and how people perceive you and how trustworthy they believe you to be. And you shouldn't underestimate that, and that's an awful position to be putting early career researchers in. So I do think if we could have a systematic set of rules of engagement around this, it would be super helpful.
And then I wanted to, and then I'll hand over to Damien, who's got deeper questions on this. A study from Chester University that was in The Guardian yesterday, don't know if you saw that. The average person watching a Premier League match will see 3,500 times gambling logos flash up, especially kids. This is a problem, isn't it? I mean, is this going to undermine the front of shirt advertising is going from 2026? We've all lauded that it was a voluntary thing. But if you can still get it on sleeves, if it's still there on the hoardings around the pitch, what is the
voluntary measures do not work. We know this from alcohol advertising, we know this from tobacco advertising previously, because industry will find ways to circumnavigate those voluntary measures. Plus, there aren't then any powers to follow up when those voluntary measures are breached. So that study is a really good example why simply just focusing on the front of shirt is nowhere near sufficient and enough to address this issue. But in my own experience, I've written to the ASA when I've seen breaches of the industry's voluntary code on advertising, and the response comes back is, it's a voluntary code. There's not a lot we can do about it.
2/3 of adults and half of all kids can name a gambling company from the logos they've seen. Do you think that sort of sports, especially football, Premiership football, has become enmeshed in this sort of gambling logo vortex? It's not like when my father did the pools in the 70s and he claimed that was a thing of great skill and not actually gambling at all. It was to do with statistics and prediction. But I mean, now you can gamble at every step of every second of the game. There's something to bet on. Do you think the whole thing's all become swirled together too much?
Absolutely. I mean, my father played the pools as well back in the day, and I remember that being a rather benign activity. He'd make his selections midweek for the Saturday afternoon games. You've got a synergy of different problems and factors. Our clinics have a large number of young male football fans, and that's no accident. You've got a culture of embedding it into a trustworthy brand, our national sport, football. People believe in those brands as a consequence. The advertising clearly shows how gambling is delivered to the public as something where it's an easy way to win, it's sociable, it's fun. And you've also got the issue of in-play football betting being an increased risk on those old discontinuous forms of football betting, and the culture of cross-selling and marketing those. Once you've opened an account as perhaps a football fan, you're likely again to be cross-sold onto online casino gambling. So there's a synergy of issues that all coalesce around this relationship between football and gambling. It's just another surprise that hasn't been addressed. And the example that you referred to of the Chester research is just another example where it could appear to the public like we're doing something, but actually when you drill into it, it's rather meaningless. So during Premier League football matches, of course, if you see the advertising hoardings, they're much bigger and brighter than they used to be. You've got the stadium advertising, you've got behind the football managers, you've got sleeves potentially and shorts having gambling logos. It goes on and on. You've got the advertising online as well as on the television around football. And it's clearly, in our experience in the clinics, leading to a significant number of primarily young men experiencing gambling harm.
And forgive me, I'll just sort of quickly say I'm not convinced that fans want to see that level of gambling advertising associated with their clubs. So I'm thinking about my club, Norwich City, a couple of years ago when an Asian white label was proposed as the shirt sponsor, and it was found out that they had YouTube videos of girls with guns, and there was a huge backlash from the fans, and the club pulled the deal. And we saw it more recently with Chelsea and Stake, where there was a fan-led pushback to the idea of having such a sponsor on the front of the shirt, and the club eventually yielded to the wishes of the fans.
And I would just add really quickly, this isn't just football. We see this across a range of other sports, but also esports, which for young people is something we need to be really attuned to. So we've recently done some research, and we see that 50% of major esports teams, in particular leagues, are now sponsored by gambling companies. And they're using their team members as influencers. There's the whole ecosystem of how that is then promoted, this particular product. So it's not just sports, it's the media and the rest of the partnerships that then build this ecosystem in which they're all partners on promoting this product, and each member of that ecosystem needs to really seriously take their responsibilities to their fans very, very seriously indeed.
Yeah, no, I think there's a whole gamblification. This Michael Duggar last week was saying, oh, it's only after 9 o'clock. That just misses the point entirely.